Hello, this is Nanako Konoshima, and the title of my paper is Making Silent Voices Heard, Sounds and Echoes in A Christmas Carol. A Christmas Carol is arguably one of the most popular works of English fiction ever written. At the same time, as Paul Davies has suggested, its textual details have yet to be more rigorously explicated, and I think that it deserves as close an analysis as Dickens' other more lengthy, complicated novels. My paper focuses on the representations of the sounds, voices, and echoes that abound in the book, and examines how the process of Scrooge's change of heart coincides with the process of change in his sense of hearing, thereby allowing us to read this story as a text that was designed to make the voices of the socially vulnerable heard by those in the society of which Scrooge is the representative. This is the famous beginning in which the narrator emphasizes that Marley is dead. Being dead, Marley is mute. The silence of the dead is exemplified also by the fourth ghost Scrooge meets, the spirit of Christmas yet to come, whose role is to hint at Scrooge's and Tiny Tim's deaths. This spirit, shrouded in black, remains mute and approaches silently. These details match the famous Freudian qualifications of the representation of death in dreams. Thus, in A Christmas Carol, as well as in many other narratives, silence is a significant characteristic of the representation of the dead. Now, I would like to get back to the beginning of the story and examine the way in which Marley makes his first appearance. This is from stave 1. Marley, whose death has been emphasized at the beginning of the book, appears in front of Scrooge and of readers as the door knocker. Animism is not rare in Dickens. This is another example, and it foretells the entrance of Marley's ghost into Scrooge's chamber. But why does Marley first appear as a door knocker, and not, for example, a doorknob? The purpose of a knocker is to announce the presence of a visitor at the door by its sound. The reason why dead Marley appears first as a knocker may be because he is trying to recover the vocal ability which he has lost when he died. Accordingly, the following paragraph to this quotation is filled with noise and sound. This is from the paragraph immediately after Scrooge closes the door and walks into the house. The door bang resounds through the house like thunder, and echoes resound in the rooms. However, as I have underlined, Scrooge is not frightened by echoes. The echoes here might be the workings of Marley, who is trying to recover his lost vocal ability, but it has no effect upon Scrooge at this point. Then, as Scrooge sits down before the fire, the disused bell starts to ring of its own accord, and Marley, making a lot of noise, comes up and appears before Scrooge. And now Marley speaks up and talks to Scrooge, and the voice disturbs the very marrow in Scrooge's bones. Marley's ghost not only speaks out, but also raises cries and makes such noise that Scrooge is about to fall in a swoon. As such, Scrooge, who has previously been described as not a man to be frightened by echoes, gradually comes under the influence of sound. Having thus stimulated Scrooge's sense of hearing, Marley cries, "Hear me," and lets Scrooge hear what he has to say. As Jane Vogel has commented, the reference to Hamlet in stave 1 may simply be an homage to Shakespeare, foreshadowing the appearance of the ghost. At the same time, however, it seems to foretell Marley's intention to have himself heard. As you can see here, when in Hamlet the ghost appears for the second time, it speaks out and says to Hamlet, "Lend thy serious hearing." This conversation between Hamlet and the ghost closely resembles the one between Marley and Scrooge. Here in A Christmas Carol, Marley's ghost says, "Hear me." Like Hamlet's father, Marley bids Scrooge to hear him. To have Scrooge listen to the voice of the dead seems to me to be a preparatory step towards the realization of the intention of the story. The reference to Hamlet at the beginning of the book suggests that a ghost will appear in order to have himself heard. Marley indeed then appears as the door knocker and afterwards cries out to be heard. These details draw Scrooge's attention to the otherwise inaudible voices. They prepare him for the silent voices to be heard. They have an immediate effect. When Marley's ghost leaves, Scrooge becomes sensible of confused noises in the air and becomes desperate in his curiosity. In this way, the encounter with Marley's ghost triggers the quick improvement or recovery of Scrooge's sense of hearing. He begins to hear various sounds and voices. Marley's ghost is followed by the ghost of Christmas past, and the ghost takes Scrooge back to his childhood. There he sees a solitary child, and pitying him, Scrooge starts to sob. As Catherine Tillotson observes, Scrooge's pity for his former self evokes regret for having rebuffed the carol-singing boy and is the first sign of his own reclamation. Although Tillotson dismisses the details, Scrooge's sign of reclamation is shown as the sounds that he hears. As I have quoted here, Scrooge starts to hear even a latent echo, a squeak and scuffle, a drip, and other tiny, almost soundless noises, and they have significant effects upon Scrooge. As I have cited before and shown again here, Scrooge was first not at all affected by the echoes of the bang of the door. However, in this quotation, even a latent echo in the house falls upon his heart. In a scene soon afterwards, Scrooge expresses regret about rejecting the carol-singing boy. In other words, he regrets not having responded to the singing voice of the boy. Thusly, Scrooge has become sensitive to voices of the little ones, and with the ghost of Christmas present, hears the blessing of Tiny Tim. The proof that Scrooge was moved by this tiny blessing is shown in the fact that he instantly asks the ghost if Tiny Tim will live. Then he meets the children, Ignorance and Want. Scrooge's question, have they no refuge or resource, is answered by the ghost's following words. Are there no prisons? Are there no workhouses? As has been noted, this reply from the spirit echoes Scrooge's own words uttered in stave 1. There, Scrooge has rebuked the gentleman who has come to ask for charity. His words expressed his refusal to help the poor. Now at the end of stave 3, his own words have come back like an echo from the ghost of Christmas present. The two children here, Ignorance and Want, stays mute. The ghost acts as their proxy and says that they are appealing from their fathers. David Parker argues that by the early 1840s, theories of utilitarianism and Robert Malthus made it possible to argue that poverty was the fault of the poor, that the rich could not be held responsible for it, and that relief for children is unnecessary. Parker argues that against such a background of ideas, the legislation to ease the lives of the poorest in community was slow in coming, and in the Hungry 40s, it was hard for the working classes not to feel neglected by governments and by the prosperous classes that elected them. Elizabeth Browning's The Cry of Children, published in 1843, was one of the instant reactions to the second report of the commissioner that reported on the conditions of urban child labor. I would like to emphasize that in this poem, Browning begins, "Do ye hear?" Browning is expressing here her intention to excite public attention to the voices of crying children, otherwise drowned out. She gives voice to the reality that there is a certain number of people in society who are unaware of the reality of child labor. Although it remains unclear whether this poem had made an impression on Dickens, there is a parallel in Browning's raising her voice on behalf of children and in Dickens' creativity regarding A Christmas Carol. The second report of the commissioner, which revealed the details of child labor in factories, not only prompted Browning, but also Dickens. As is examined by Tillotson and others, he first planned to write a social pamphlet called An Appeal to the People of England on behalf of the poor man's child. The change in the initial plan proved a huge success. Dickens writes, "See what I do and where and how, you will certainly feel that a sledgehammer has come down with 20 times the force." This metaphor of a hammer for A Christmas Carol seems multivalent, in the sense that a hammer's battering may be widely audible, and a book's publication may gain a wide audience, and that a sledgehammer may transform hard metal, and a story may transform a hard reality by exciting public attention and need for social reform. Of course, happy sounds like Christmas greetings, the fiddle at old Fezziwig's, and the people's hearty laughter may also play important roles in the book, creating the atmosphere of the festivity of the season. Yet at the same time, in the context that I have argued, A Christmas Carol, published 4 months after The Cry of Children, which also bears a title referring to a vocal sound, can be read as a story that resounds with voices of the voiceless children or of the socially vulnerable, whose silent appeal was otherwise ignored by the Malthusians. Dead Molly turning into a knocker in stave 1 is the sign that inherently silent sounds and unheard voices are going to resound and make themselves heard in the story. Paul Davies surveyed the reception of A Christmas Carol until the end of the 20th century, and it is telling that in his conclusion, he suggests that this Christmas story has been orally enjoyed even in the era when literacy rate has much improved. The fact reveals that the story itself has close affinity with something to be heard. As is well known, this work was the one Dickens first performed in his public readings. Until his death, he read it more than 100 times on stage, and he wrote in a letter that it has tremendous effects on the hearers. These facts prove the oral power of this story. This is the list of works cited. Thank you for watching.